Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to briefly touch upon constructors in Java and why they can be very helpful and useful. So in this example, on my screen I have a class on my left which is just going to have the main method to demonstrate the functionality. And on the right I've created a class called person which will just hold some basic pieces of information about a person. So I'm going to add a first name, a last name, and I will add an age. And so let's just say we have a basic class with 3 fields of information. Normally if I wanted to create an instance of a class like this, I would probably do something like this. So I would just create a test person and use the new keyword to instantiate it. And before I dive any further, so assuming we use this, if you use something like this, this is actually using what we call a default constructor behind the scenes. And essentially what it's doing is, since there's no constructor specifically defined in my class, which as you can see there's not here, Java knows to use the default constructor, which is just a special method which will be called, and it will populate the attributes with their default values. So if you were to look up default values for strings, you would see that it is null. And if you looked it up for int, it would be 0. So just for example, if I were to print out the age, and I have to reference the object, so testperson.age. And if I were to also print out the first name, based on the order I'm printing them out, this would be 0 and this would be null. So if I run this, as you can see, we get 0 and null. Now, let's say we still don't have a constructor specifically defined, but I do want to set the values myself. So I would just do something like this, where I say testperson.firstName equals Mark, and testperson.lastName equals, we'll just say Rodriguez. I think I might have spelled that wrong, but that's fine. And then testperson.age equals 33. So I'd say this is probably pretty normal functionality that somebody would use. And the problem with this is that if you have an application where you have 100 people, or whatever the application might be, and you need to scale, this kind of code right here, you're not going to want to do this 100 times for 100 people, because obviously that would be a lot of lines of code that we could just make more efficient, and the maintenance would be unbearable. So what you can do is you can create what we call a constructor. And just for also example's sake, I'm actually going to just recopy this and create another person object. And we'll just say testperson2, and we'll say the first name is Sally, and the last name is, we'll just say Applegate. It's not the most common last name. And we'll give her an age of 63. So I've created 2 objects of type person, and I've given them specific values. Now, let's say I don't want to do this. Let's just say I want to make this much more simplified. I can do that using constructors. So to create a constructor, you would go to the class. In this case, since I'm using person, it would be here. And you have to use the public keyword, specify the class name, and then open parentheses, just like this. And at the end of the day, this is nothing more than just a special method. So as you can see, we've given it public, we've given it the class name to match person, and we've given it parentheses. And inside these parentheses, you can give it parameters. And what we can do with these parameters is, based on what we get passed in, we can specifically do certain things with that information that we've been given. So in this case, I'm going to pass in a first name, a last name, and I'm going to pass in an age. I did not mean to do that. I'm just going to repeat that. So first, string last, and age. Now you'll notice I'm getting an error right now. And specifically the error is coming on the left side of the screen, where I've already instantiated the first 2 objects. And this is actually happening because I've created an explicit constructor, but it's no longer going to use the default. And so just to get around this will make more sense in a little bit. For now, we'll just create another constructor, that's also the other good thing, is you can have multiple constructors. That's all we have to do is just create another one. And the reason why I had to do this is now because since I've already defined a constructor, when you go to create an instance, you have to specifically use the constructor where the parameters agree with each other. So you'll notice in this case, I'm not passing in anything. And here I've just also created a constructor with no parameters. So in the first two cases here, it's going to use this constructor, which at the end of the day is not really doing anything. But if we go back to the other constructor that we were creating, in this case, I've passed in a string first name, a string last name, and an age. And so now what I can do is I can say this dot first name equals first, this dot last name equals last, and this dot age equals age. And all this is doing is we're passing in 3 parameters, and we're saying take those parameters and map them to their corresponding fields on the class. So the first name that got passed in will get mapped to the first name on the class, and over for all the other attributes. And you'll notice if you use this sort of functionality, what you can do is now create a person object. And in this case, we'll do test person 3. Do the same exact way, but now when it comes time for the parameters, you would say, since you want to use this constructor, you need to specifically pass in these parameters in the same order. So I would pass in Marcus, and we'll just give it a last name of Johnson, and we'll give him an age of 19. And so here, if I go ahead and now print out these attribute fields, and just say test person 3 dot first name, test person 3 dot last name, and test person 3 dot age. So if I print this out, you're going to notice Marcus Johnson 19, which is what we want, which is what I passed in here. And if you can now compare this, which I'm actually just going to remove the print statements. If I compare this versus an example, say like this, you'll notice with 1 line of code, I was able to accomplish the same exact goal as here, which is 4 lines of code. And that's where constructors come into play, because they're a great example of code reusability, and they allow you to really simplify your code and not use any spaghetti code. And it's really as simple as that. And obviously I could go into more detail about constructors, but I really just wanted to touch on a base example of why they're very helpful. So really all we did was we created a constructor in the class, we gave it parameters, and then based on those parameters, we set it in the class itself instead of explicitly defining them in whatever class you're dealing with. And that's where really the key is with constructors. So hopefully this video was a little helpful. I'm sorry if maybe I confused you a little bit any along the way, but if you have any comments, just go ahead and drop them. And if there's any other ideas of videos you might want me to upload, please let me know also in the comment section. And thank you for watching.